Without further ado, please welcome the director of tonight's Readers Theater, Dr Blim.
Just so you know, this book has a ton of information in it. It's an excellent read. 71 people are part of the story in this book over 3 locations. Tonight, we are going to focus on the women who had a lawsuit against USRC, which is United States Radium Corporation. These are the 4 Radium Girls. On both sides are the doctors, investigators, lawyers, corporate people that either helped them or hindered them and lied to them. Introduction. Paris, France, 1898. Radium, discovered by Marie and Pierre Curie, was so difficult to extract from its source that there were only a few grams available anywhere in the world. These gleamings, Marie wrote, of the luminous effect seemed suspended in the darkness and stirred us with an ever new emotion and enchantment. Radium was championed as the greatest find in history. There were radioactive pills, clinics, and spas for those who could afford them. It claimed to restore vitality and cure tumors. The rich and famous drank it as a tonic of liquid sunshine. It was called the unknown god. Yet, as playwright George Bernard Shaw once wrote, the gods of old are constantly demanding human sacrifices. Part 1, Knowledge, February 1917. Catherine Shaw started her new job at the watch dial factory of the U.S. Radium Corporation in Newark, New Jersey.
I was excited. It sounded so glamorous. It wasn't even a factory, but a studio. The girls sat in rows, painting dials at top speed with radium. Each dial painter had her own supply and mixed the paint with radium powder that created a greenish-white luminous paint called Undark. The powder and dust was everywhere. It made the girls themselves gleam. We were using slim camel hair brushes. The radium was so precious that it could not be wasted. We put the brushes in our mouths. It was a technique called lip dip paint. We asked, "Does this stuff hurt you?" No, we were told, "Radium is a wonder drug. If anything, you should benefit from the exposure." There is no need to be afraid. In 1917, Congress voted to enter the War to End All Wars. Demand skyrocketed. A second plant was opened. More dial painters were recruited.
Grace Fryer was the daughter of a union-minded family of 10 children when she joined.
We needed the money, and we were paid piecework for the number of dials we painted, at an average rate of 1.5 cents. The most talented workers could walk away with an astonishing pay package. Some earned more than the average factory worker, some even more than their fathers.
Molly Maggia joined her sister Albina, followed by 16-year-old Quinta.
Our parents were Italian immigrants. Newark was full of immigrants from all parts of Europe. Most dial painters were the daughters of immigrants. We all became friends working together on the lip dip paint routine all day long. The war raged. Over 300 girls were recruited to paint dials. There was a lot of pressure to not waste paint. When a shift was over, we went into the darkroom to be brushed off. The sparkling particles were swept for use the next day. We were covered in it. Our hands, arms, necks, the dresses, and underclothes were luminous. We glowed like ghosts as we walked home.
Edna Bolts was only 16 when she was hired.
The majority were teenagers. We were merry, giggling girls.
We used to scratch our name and address into a watch for the soldier who would wear it. Sometimes he would respond with a note. The studio was a madhouse. We could barely keep up with the demand, working 7 days a week and into the night. We glowed even brighter from the radium against the dark windows, a workshop of shining girls.
Sabin von Sashaki, an Austrian-born 34-year-old doctor, could be seen holding court at the many social events the company organized.
I invented the luminous paint they used. I had studied under the Curies themselves. The Curies by this time were intimately familiar with radium's hazards, having suffered many burns themselves. Radium could cure tumors, it was true, but it destroyed healthy tissue in the process. No one heeded the warnings of Thomas Edison, working just a few miles away, who remarked, "There may be a condition in which radium would produce dire results. Everybody handling it should do so with care." Yet in the sunny studio, no one had a care in the world.
Grace remembered von Sashaki passing through her workstation.
It surprised me to see him, but I didn't pay much attention as I did my routine of lip, dip, paint. He spoke to me suddenly.
Do not do that. You will get sick.
Then he was on his way. I wondered about his comment, but had no time to think about it since we were pressured to work non-stop. A few girls found the paint made them sick. They got open sores, tooth decay, aching joints. A few quit while the others confronted the company. A company man came from New York with von Sashaki. We were assured that it could not harm us, so we turned back to work, lip, dip, paint.
Catherine was feeling tired.
There was a lot of pressure. If a worker failed to keep up, she was criticized. If she fell short repeatedly, she lost her job. I noticed cracking and stiffness of my legs. I was feeling in poor spirits generally. On November 11th, 1918, the war ended. Congress passed the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. At work, there was no time to be sick.
Arthur Roeder was the new president of USRC.
The company was doing well with the trademark of undark, but the demand dwindled. We couldn't afford to waste the radium. The residue looked like seaside sand, so we offloaded this industrial waste by selling it to schools and playgrounds to be used in children's sandboxes. After all, von Sashaki pronounced it most hygienic and beneficial to the children.
Molly was suffering with her teeth.
The pain was intense. I went to see Dr. Niff, an expert in mouth diseases. I was treated for pyorrhea, a common inflammatory disease. Yet I didn't improve and became steadily worse. In the weeks that passed, the pain spread to my hips and feet. They thought it was rheumatism. Then my teeth began falling out.
Dr. Joseph Neff called it disintegration.
There was something attacking Molly from the inside. I visited the radium plant, but received no cooperation. I asked for the formula of their compound. This was refused. Molly's pain continued with no cure. I prodded delicately inside her mouth. To my horror, the entire lower jaw broke in my fingers. She was tested for syphilis, and the results came back positive. This was, of course, not the reason for her illness, but no one questioned it at the time. Her condition worsened. Her mouth was flooded with blood as she hemorrhaged. Molly died a painful death. She was only 24.
The girls at the Radium Dial plant in Illinois had not heard of these health issues.
We had the best jobs in town. We were youthful and vivacious, and the envy of those not dial painting. It was the roaring 20s. Prohibition was huge, and there were parties and gambling everywhere. We used to paint our eyebrows, our lips, our eyelashes with the residue, and then look at ourselves in the mirror in the dark room. We turned off the lights and laughed a lot. We glowed in the dark. We were invisible. All you could see was the radium, but it was just for fun.
Dr. Walter Berry, another dentist, says there was more going on.
I reported there was an occupational program to the Industrial Hygiene Division and asked them to investigate. An inspector was sent to the plant, looking into the claims of industrial poisoning. He visited the studio, examined the paint, observed the dial painters. He was told the girls were warned time and time again of the dangerous practice of lip painting, but the girls would not stop. The dial painters had a strong network of friendship and responded that, on the contrary, they had received countless assurances of the exact opposite. The inspector reported that these cases were probably a coincidence resulting from abscessed teeth and incompetent dental surgery.
Grace had more aches and pains and more teeth extracted.
I was promoted and could not quit. I needed the money to pay for my health care. My coworker Helen died at 22 years of age. The death certificate said bacterial disease. 6 weeks later, Irene died at age 21. The cause stated was necrosis in her jaw. Catherine and I went to the Department of Health and filed a claim. They responded stating, a foreman at the plant said the claims were not true. And that was that.
Dr. Berry had never seen so many patients come through his door.
I saw illnesses I didn't even know how to treat. Rumors of my involvement soon reached USRC, somewhat to their annoyance. Undark was considered the standard material for government use with the Navy and the Army, as well as hospitals and physicians. Due to my assistance, they contacted their insurance company, which concluded that the 4 deaths was not a cause for concern and there was no hazard in the occupation. The doctors and dentists across New Jersey were confused by what they saw, but they didn't share notes, so each case was viewed in isolation.
Hazel Vincent, her pain worsening, made the journey to New York City in January 1924.
I went for treatment with Dr. Blim, a prestigious specialist who had pioneered the use of x-rays for dental diagnosis. Blim's fees were extraordinary, but he was worth his money. After examination and surgery on my jaw, my husband and I waited to hear one thing: hope. Instead, Dr. Blim told us, there is little chance of recovery. My mother had watched me in constant pain. More and more girls fell ill. After hearing Dr. Blim's no-hope conclusion, my mother had nothing to lose. She went to the studio and left a letter for a claim for compensation due to my illness. That got their attention. Now it was bad for business.
Arthur Roeder, company president, took charge of the investigation himself.
I brought in Dr. Cecil Drinker and his wife, Dr. Catherine Drinker, both recognized authorities in occupational disease. Catherine Drinker examined 25 of the women to determine to what degree they were luminous. As the women undressed in the dark room, she witnessed the dust lingering on their bodies and their undergarments. Every inch of them was marked by it. They made their report.
Hazel was refused any help from the company.
The Drinker report was swept under the rug. Dr. Blim was outraged. He accused the company, speaking on my behalf. You should close down the plant. You've made $5 million. Why go on killing people for more money? I am appealing to the humane sense of your corporation to find out what you could do to help this poor creature. The corporation cared not for his comments. He continued to see me and the other girls as we were becoming unrecognizable, with swollen jaws, missing teeth, hips that would not move. He appealed to the Board of Health, which brought in Catherine Wiley of the Consumers League, a national organization that fought for better working conditions for women.
I was asked to investigate and given a list of women affected. The families of these women hit the same brick wall over and over. When I met Hazel, I was shocked. This poor, sick young thing looked very transparent. She was broke and desperate and considering legal action to get some money to pay for her treatment. I could not rest until I had seen something done whereby I was assured it would not happen again. In May 1924, I returned to the Department of Labor with the results of my investigation. The commissioner was furious to find that the Consumers League had stuck its nose into the matter. He was frustrated by this nagging woman and asked what I wanted. An investigation by the U.S. Public Health Service. Put it in writing, he told me. I did so, at once. The situation was unbearable and frustrating. Dr. Alice Hamilton, a brilliant scientist and specialist in industrial diseases who always championed the victims, joined me as we visited Hazel. Dr. Blim called Hazel's condition radium jaw. This term should have captured the imagination of the medical community, but it went entirely unnoticed. We proceeded to write President Roeder of USRC of our plan to file a suit against the company for $75,000. The publicity was horrendous. The company name was dragged through the mud. Sadly, Hazel did not live long enough to go to trial. She died in 1924 at the age of 25.
Arthur Roeder blamed the Women's Club for all of this bother.
Catherine Wiley was becoming more than an annoyance. I could handle the begging letters from the women and the doctors, but now there was a threat to publish a report in the American Medical Association. The drinker investigation, which I thought absolved the company, instead reported that radium was the problem. They wanted to meet with me, but I stressed I was so busy that I was already contemplating giving up my Saturdays at the seashore during the summer.
Quinta spent 9 months in a constricting plaster cast that encased her body.
When it was removed, I could only walk with the greatest difficulty. All the women were deteriorating. What we needed was a champion, a medical mastermind, someone who could not only command authority and diagnose our diseases, but most importantly, a doctor who wasn't in the pocket of the company. Dr. Harrison Martland entered the story when he became chief medical examiner for the county.
I had briefly met some of Dr. Berry's patients, and the cases remained on my mind. In June 1925, the first male employee of USRC died at age 36. He was a chemist who had scoffed at the drinker's report about the blackened lesions on his hands the year before he died. The case was referred to me. An autopsy revealed his remains were saturated with radioactivity. I knew radium poisoning was incurable.
One by one, Dr. Martland met with us. Catherine, Quinta, Grace. We weren't at death's door at this time, but to each he said the same. He told us it was all due to the presence of radium and there was no cure. The diagnosis was shocking, but it brought relief too. I was not as frightened as I thought I would be. At least there was no groping in the dark now. We had been given the tools to fight for justice, and that gave me hope.
Part 2, power. The company had tried to keep everyone in the dark. The Department of Labor, the medical community, and the women they had doomed to die. But now the momentum was building for the dial painter's cause. Grace was examined by Dr. Martland with von Sashaki present.
I remembered him saying to me, "Don't do that, you will get sick." He knew, and now I confronted him. "Why didn't you tell us?"
The matter was not in my jurisdiction, but in Mr. Roeder's. I could do nothing.
I tucked the diagnosis away in my mind and carried on. I didn't stop working. I didn't change my habits. I kept swimming and socializing and going to the theater. I don't believe in giving up.
Quinta joined Catherine and Grace to bring a lawsuit against USRC.
We needed to get some help with our crippling medical bills. The Workmen's Compensation Bureau had a statute of limitations. The law cared nothing for the fact that this disease took years to manifest. Lawyers were not interested without first getting a fee. They had not heard of radium poisoning and were reluctant to take on the USRC. Perhaps, as Arthur Roeder said, the girls were trying to palm off something on the firm.
Catherine helped put together a list of the affected girls.
Dr. Martland was the only one who knew. I supplied him with as many names as I could remember, which was 50. Over time, the list was updated with a D added after a name, D for death. It became known as the List of the Doomed. I was still in fairly good health, but the worry was taking an effect on my spirit. I was confined to a hospital for nervous disorders. USRC, keeping tabs on me, called me mentally deranged. I stayed home and refused to go out. While other girls were going to dances and the theater and courting, I had to remain and watch painful death approach. I was so lonely.
Catherine Wiley was referred to Dr. Frederick Finn.
I asked him to meet with the girls. What I didn't know is that Dr. Finn was on the payroll of USRC. He made a small effort to contact Catherine and asked her to come to his office. Catherine wrote back that she was too ill. Finn reported back, "I never replied to her letter. If she wasn't willing to come to my office, I certainly wasn't going to put myself out. A girl of that class didn't appreciate it when you did try to aid her."
Grace's jaw problems were ongoing.
My medical bills were rising, and my parents couldn't cover them. And now my back began to hurt. I was in pain all the time. I was fitted with a solid steel back brace. It extended from my shoulders to my waist and was held in place by 2 crossbars of steel. I was permitted to take it off for only 2 minutes at a time throughout the day. I was urged to seek an attorney.
Raymond Berry was not yet 30, but already he was a junior partner in the law firm.
I interviewed Yvonne Shishaki, then Grace and Catherine. I had seen enough, and I took the case. I addressed the statute of limitations question. The girls could not have brought a lawsuit until they knew the company was to blame. Dr. Martin's formal diagnosis was in July 1925. The 2-year clock didn't start until then. It was now May 1927. We were just in time. More girls joined us. There were 5 now: Grace, Catherine, Quinta, Albina, and Edna, crying out for justice. The newspapers went mad and declared the case of the 5 women doomed to die has now begun. The company executives were taken completely by surprise by the lawsuits. It was called a conspiracy. They began blaming everyone. The forelady of USRC who trained the girls, Von Shishaki, me, and of course the girls themselves. They found Grace's earlier claim and said, "Give us your best offer." I wrote back, "So far as settlement is concerned, Grace does not desire to make any proposition. We will see you in court."
Dr. Finn tried to persuade the girls to accept settlements that freed the company from further liability. Some women accepted the offers. With the good doctor's intervention, the company spent an average of $5,600 per affected woman. Most victims received less. In one shocking case, the offer was $43.75 for a woman's death. I decided to investigate Dr. Finn. The New Jersey Board of Medical Examiners confirmed that there was no record of a license to practice medicine issued in that name. Dr. Finn was not a medical doctor. His degree was in philosophy. He was, as the Consumers League put it, a fraud of frauds. World was the most powerful newspaper at that time. Walter Lippmann, a Pulitzer Prize writer and editor, denounced the company's stand against the girls. His editorial read, "The attempt of the corporation to take refuge in the statute of limitations is intolerable and despicable." The court agreed, and the trial date was set for January 1928.
Preparing for trial, Raymond Berry had to prove that it was radium that was killing those girls.
The only way that that could be done was to reduce the bones to ash. The only girl who could prove this was my sister Molly, who had died a few years ago. On October 15th, we met at Molly's gravesite, company executives, doctors, lawyers, her sisters, and our father. Our family had not protested since we knew Molly's body could provide the evidence they needed. A tent was set up, and curtains were drawn around the party as they stood and watched the casket being brought up. Despite the dim light, the casket seemed to glow with an unnatural light, the luminescence of radium compounds. The autopsy revealed that there was no syphilis that she was diagnosed with. The cause of death was poisoned by radioactivity due to radium.
Edna entered the courthouse with the other 4 women.
The trial began in January 1928 We worked our way through the reporters. I was the first to give evidence. My husband had to almost carry me to the witness stand. I could no longer move my legs apart since my hips had locked in place. I had no use of my right arm and could not even raise it to take the oath. Once tall and beautiful, I was now a 26-year-old crippled housewife.
Edward Markley was the attorney for the Radium Firm's insurance company.
I was encouraged by the company to question and object to every piece of evidence. I harangued Edna to remember dates and how often she had pain. My aggressive tactics were met by sympathy for the witness.
The judge fired back.
Of what importance is it how often she has pain?
Grace took the stand and sat awkwardly in the chair in her metal back brace.
We were instructed to point the brush with our lips. Dr. von Shishaki passed through once, and when he saw me put the brush to my lips, he said it would make me sick. I have had 17 procedures on my jaws and pieces of the jawbone removed. Most of my teeth are gone. My spine is decaying.
We all gave testimony. The press called us a sadly smiling sorority who maintained an attitude of almost cheerful resignation. Many in the courtroom were in tears. Edward Markley often made cynical, smart comments about us.
The judge snapped back.
If I find you guilty, I think you will be sorry.
Dr. Martland took the stand.
I explained the autopsy findings on 2 of the girls.
Markley objected.
It was just 2 out of 100 girls, and these girls suing are the only ones that had this trouble.
There are about 13 or 14 girls that are dead and buried who, if you dig them up, will all show the same thing.
I ask that be stricken as an assumption on the part of the doctor without foundation.
The judge ruled.
Let it stand.
Markley approached the bench for a discussion off the record. The judge pronounced, "This hearing is adjourned to September 24th.
This was 5 months away, a time that some of us probably didn't have. We were devastated.
Walter Lippmann wrote, "This is a damnable travesty of justice. Open the courts."
Letters came pouring in demanding that we 5 women have a fighting chance.
Quinta and Grace gave a joint photo shoot and interview. By now, Quinta had to be carried to her hospital appointments.
Don't write all this stuff in the papers about our bearing up wonderfully. I am either a martyr or a saint. I still live in hope, but I am facing fate.
I couldn't say I'm happy, but at least I'm not utterly discouraged. I intend to make the most out of what life is left to me. I will donate my body to science. My body means nothing but pain to me, and it might mean longer life or relief to others. It is all I have to give.
Raymond Berry soon realized how much the coverage was helping.
The public took the girls to their hearts. The journalists filled the papers with stories. I found 2 lawyers who had a case scheduled for the end of May, and they were willing to give up their dates so that the girls' case could be heard. USRC was not happy with my intervention. But the judge came to my rescue with an inspired interpretation of the statute of limitations. Because the girls' bones contained radium, they were being injured constantly, and every injury reset the clock. The trial was reset from September back to May. USRC was not ready to proceed, met with their insurance company, then with a judge who approached me with a settlement for each girl. The company had good reason to want to settle. The publicity was strongly in favor of the girls. I knew the situation was dire. Some of the girls may not live long enough to endure another trial. The settlement may bring them some relief and end peace. I pitched alternative terms, a lump sum for each woman, a pension a year, and all medical expenses to be covered by USRC. Quinta, Edna, Albina, Catherine, and Grace met with me for 3 hours. Then they signed the settlement papers. The lump sum was $10,000 for each girl. The settlement also specified that the company admitted no guilt.
I think Mr. Berry has done wonderful work. We couldn't have waited much longer. It will mean a lot of the things we want. for as long as we can appreciate them. God has heard my prayers.
I gave my father $2,000. I could find no greater happiness than to help my family. For us, it meant everything. I bought a coat I have always wanted. I bought a typewriter and decided to take a vacation in the country to write and be free of the courts. I wrote to Dr. Martin to express my sincere appreciation in bringing it all to a happy ending.
A happy ending was difficult for the women. Following the settlement, USRC immediately launched into damage mode regarding what they called so-called radium poisoning in front of the patients. A medical board was appointed to examine the girls and give a clean bill of health. 2 doctors who questioned the existence of radium poisoning were hired. To make the test absolutely trustworthy, they said it was necessary to carry them out at some hotel where the patients can undress.
I was very lame and bent over.
I had limitation of motion and an exposed jawbone.
My legs were crossed with no hip ability.
I was in a plaster cast. Albina's condition was so severe that it was almost impossible for the doctor to make a vaginal examination.
We came to the hotel and were forced to strip as directed.
We went through the test with the company men watching, as they did closely.
Grace telephoned Raymond Berry the moment they left the hotel.
He was outraged and viewed the hotel setting with great suspicion, constituting a breach of the settlement agreement. As it turned out, however, the doctor who was testing us declared that all 5 patients are radioactive. It was a blow to the company, for every day they received another lawsuit. Dr. von Shishaki lost his own battle against the radium inside him. One newspaper described radium paint as a Frankenstein in a test tube, which is turned on its creator. He died a horrible death.
USRC was not done. Finding the girls still alive 1 year later was a financial irritation. They were crippled and in pain and regularly consulting doctors and buying medicine. The company tried to renege on its agreement. The women were told that each medical bill had to be scrutinized before payment.
Raymond Berry continued to fight for them as their health was declining.
Quinta was admitted to the hospital in December 1929, where she sank into a coma. When she died, Edna, Albina, and Grace came for her funeral. For Albina, this was the second sister she had lost to radium poisoning. It was a struggle for her to be there, but she was determined to pay her respects.
Catherine, walking with a cane, fell hard upon her knee.
My bones were as fragile as china. The news was worse. I had a sarcoma of the knee. Despite my faith, I found the prognosis depressing, but I had finished writing my memoir and had an excerpt of it published in a social reformers magazine. I was a published author. It's what I had always longed to be. I was granted a priceless gift and found happiness. Catherine died in February 1933 at the age of 30. She was just 14 when she started work with the Radium Company. In taking on the company, she became an example of standing up for your rights.
Grace had 25 operations on her jaw.
I also had a sarcoma on my knee and was admitted to the hospital. I'm not going to live much longer. No one has ever been known to recover from this. So of course, I will not either. But why worry? Grace died in October 1933. As a dial painter, she glowed gloriously from the radium powder. But as a woman, she shines through history with an even brighter glory.
Edna had once been examined by Dr. Finn.
He told me that my health was perfect. Edna died in March 1939 at the age of 40. She was said to have maintained good spirits and courage until the end.
Albina outlived her 2 sisters, Molly and Quinta.
The company always led us to believe everything was under control and safe, but I don't think they cared. Albina lived till she was 51, passing away in 1946. Pictures of her at the end show her smiling with no tension in her face.
Part 3, Justice. The Radium Girls did not die in vain. Although they could not save themselves from the poison, their sacrifice saved many thousands of others. Safety standards were introduced. Radium Dial in Illinois was shut down. Even after World War II was over, the dial painter's legacy continued to save lives as the world entered the age of atomic energy. In 1963, partly in response to the research on the dial painters, President Kennedy signed the International Limited Test Ban Treaty, which prohibited atomic tests above ground, underwater, and in outer space. The ban undoubtedly saved lives and very possibly the human race.
There were dial painters still living, with a time bomb ticking in their bones. It's impossible to say how many were killed by their work. Many were misdiagnosed or never traced, so records simply do not exist.
As for the company, eventually the law caught up with them. In 1979, the Environmental Protection Agency found USRC had unacceptable environmentally hazardous levels of radioactivity. The EPA ordered the corporation to perform cleanup work, but it refused, except to erect a new security fence. The New Jersey Supreme Court found USRC forever liable for contamination and fined the company $14.2 million. It cost the government $144 million to clean up radium-contaminated sites.
For a long time, the legacy of the Radium Girls was recorded only in the law books and scientific files. But in 2006, an 8th grade girl in Illinois read a book about them and began to champion their cause. She approached the mayor. Her goal was to have the dial painters recognized with a statue. $80,000 was needed. The town held fish fry fundraisers and staged plays until they reached their goal.
The governor came to town and made an announcement. The Radium Girls deserve the utmost respect and admiration. They battled a dishonest company, an indifferent industry, dismissive courts, and the medical community in the face of certain death. I hereby proclaim September 7, 2011 as Radium Girls Day in Illinois in recognition of the tremendous perseverance and sense of justice.
The bronze statue for the dial painters was unveiled in Ottawa, Illinois.
It is a statue of a young woman from the 1920s.
She holds a paintbrush in one hand and a tulip in the other, standing on a clock face.
Her skirt swishes as though at any moment she might step down from her time-ticking pedestal and come to life.
And that concludes the Radium Girls story.